afternoon, Oregon. We couldn't be happier that you decided to go ahead, forge ahead, stiff upper lip, keep the chin up, that no matter what we face, we are going to get through this. And I'm glad that you had that attitude. So we are looking forward to hearing your testimony. My name is Lynn Uzzell. I teach American politics here at the University of Virginia.
My name is Lindsey Draper, retired from the juvenile court bench here in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Really kind of look forward all the time to explaining that one of the high points of my year is visiting with my goddaughter in Tualatin.
My name is Trey Delap, and in addition to being a We the People alum from nationals in the previous century, I know how exciting this is, and I am really, really proud of all the students who pressed on, pressed through, and I'm proud of your teacher, and I'm proud of all the Jessicas of the world who have made this happen. So in addition to that, I have a consulting firm in Nevada where I do lobbying at the state level, and I'm also the executive director of the Nevada Center for Civic Engagement, which is the home of We the People programs in the great state of Nevada. So really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Now, please introduce yourself and your teacher.
Hi, we're Unit 2. We study how the framers created the U.S. Constitution. I'm Kate.
Hello, I'm Madeline.
Good afternoon, I'm Kareen.
Hi, I'm Xander.
Good afternoon, I'm Miriam.
Hello, I'm Gabby, and we'd like to thank our teacher, Patrick McGee-Jenks, and our coaches, as well as you, the judges, for being here today.
Wonderful. So as you already know, we are Unit 2, and we are addressing question number 1, which I will now read. The states sent delegates to the Philadelphia Convention to join with other states, quote, in devising and discussing all such alterations and further provisions as may be necessary to render the federal Constitution adequate to the exigencies of the Union, end quote. To what extent, if any, did the delegates follow their instructions? What experiences of state governments under their new constitutions after independence might have influenced the creation of the Constitution? Do the decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court function as a continuing constitutional convention? Why or why not? You may begin.
The delegates were sent to Philadelphia to solve the crisis of the Confederation. Americans could not meet the exigencies of the Union when the federal government was too weak to raise revenue, put down a rebellion, manage the economy, or carry out its foreign policy.
The delegates did not follow the explicit instructions of their state legislatures. Instead of proposing amendments to the Articles of Confederation for approval by the legislatures, they drafted an entirely new constitution for approval by popular conventions.
However, the framers did follow their instructions by addressing the nation's exigencies head-on at the convention. For instance, after uncooperative states refused to meet requisitions, the framers granted Congress the power to tax in Article 1, Section 8.
The framers also resolved long-simmering conflicts over trade and international relations. A more powerful federal government was designed to assert control over these areas, with Congress's Article 1, Section 8 powers to regulate commerce and raise armies, and the President's Article 2 powers to make treaties and receive ambassadors.
Citizen uprisings threatened to tear the young Confederacy apart. With no support from the federal government, Massachusetts Governor James Bowdoin relied on a private militia to put down Shays' Rebellion. In Federalist 70, Alexander Hamilton argued that a more energetic executive would be better equipped to deal with emergencies. The framers also gave the federal government the duty to protect states from domestic violence in Article 4, Section 4.
When drafting the new Constitution, the framers were guided by their experiences living under state constitutions. According to historian Jackson Turner Maine, each state's unique approach to governance influenced what the framers did or did not put in the new Constitution.
Pennsylvania's unchecked unicameral legislature led to tyranny of the majority. Their state government was so fractious that John Adams even compared it to King George's rule. To avoid this, the framers created a system of checks and balances in a bicameral legislature.
New York's constitution included a council of revision, which had the power to veto bills that it deemed unconstitutional. This council inspired Hamilton to advocate for the presidential veto power in Federalist 69, a power that is granted in Article 1, Section 7.
Virginia's constitution was the first to create an independent judiciary. Having seen Virginia's General Assembly pass bills thoughtlessly, James Madison recognized the importance of a judicial check on the legislative branch. lesson he took with him to the convention.
However, the creation of a federal judicial branch in Article 3 raised new questions about the role of the Supreme Court and how it interprets the Constitution.
The Supreme Court and its decisions cannot be called the Constitutional Convention. While justices do address critical constitutional issues like the framers did, they do not represent the people. Justice Antonin Scalia contended that even the elected members of a state Supreme Court can hardly be considered a representative assembly.
One way the court does function like a continuing constitutional convention is by interpreting concepts like due process and equal protection. The power of judicial review, which was established in Marbury v. Madison, also upholds the framers' legacy by striking down unconstitutional acts.
But the Supreme Court is in conversation with the American people, who have the power to propose constitutional amendments that reverse unpopular court decisions. When the Supreme Court held in Oregon v. Mitchell that the federal government could not universally grant 18-year-olds the right to vote, Congress and the states passed the 26th Amendment.
While the Supreme Court does not represent the people, it has preserved the power of we the people by upholding our Constitution for over 200 years. As Chief Justice John Marshall said in the majority opinion of McCulloch v. Maryland, a Constitution is intended to endure for ages to come and must be adapted to the various crises of human affairs. Thank you, and we are ready for your questions.
Okay, nicely done. So you mentioned that the delegates did not follow their state instructions. So I'm wondering, since they had different instructions from Congress and from state legislatures as well, who were they beholden to? Who were the constituents of the federal convention?
The constituents were really their states. They were sent there, and a lot of them abided by what their state wanted. For example, James Madison argued in the Virginia Plan for a very strong central government, which would benefit Virginia, so he was really playing for his overall state.
However, as the Constitution ends up reading we the people, they also had a role to represent the people of their state, not just the state legislature and their state legislature's interests.
Similarly, many delegates, such as Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts, made sure that he was using the delegate theory representation and made sure that his constituents, as Gabby previously mentioned, were his state legislatures, because that was the main goal. And that was the letter instituted and codified within the letter that sent him to the convention and was his explicit instructions, and evidently led to Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 of the Constitution, which was a slave trade clause and how it would end in 1808, because it was important and it was imperative for his state and for his economic interests of his state to make sure that slavery was codified within the Constitution to a certain extent, and he did that effectively.
Throughout your presentation, you have cited states that I would, with the exception of Virginia, have called northern states, and even with Virginia, that I would classify as the large states. Can you give me anything at all that came from either southern or smaller states that say they were adequate participants in contributing?
One example is equal representation, which came about from smaller states. And Charles Pinckney, who was a delegate from a small state, fervently advocated for equal representation and even threatened to leave the convention at one point if they did not secure equal representation in Article 1, Section 2.
Yeah, and adding on to what Madeline was saying, Rhode Island specifically, they kept on advocating for equal representation, and so they would block votes from happening because of the unanimous assent clause in the Articles of Confederation.
Go ahead.
But the fact that Rhode Island didn't show up at the Constitutional Convention, didn't that basically say we don't want to be involved in this at all?
It didn't say that they didn't really want to be involved. It just said that they didn't want to create a new system as the system currently was benefiting them. And I think that they just wanted to keep going with the system that was benefiting them. And eventually they felt the need to stay with the Union after economic sanctions.
Thank you.
It was clear in your presentation, talking about the branches of government and Federalist 70, the need for an energetic executive. How's that working out for us now?
Well, I do think our executive right now is very energetic. I think President Trump is very often on Twitter, and he's always very he advocates for what he thinks is right and is not afraid to speak his opinion.
Article 8 of the Virginia Plan actually stated that the executive should be kind of intertwined with the judicial branch. And I see that this gives it energy, and that although this isn't really apparent today, even though in Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2, the president has the power to appoint the Supreme Court justices, I do think that the executive is very energetic in that regard throughout the different branches.
I really don't think the executive is very energetic, because a lot of the powers currently are being delegated to the states during the coronavirus pandemic, as President Trump hasn't enacted a nationwide stay-at-home order, and states have been left up to do that. So I don't really think that it's a very energetic executive in the sense that he's communicating with the states.
Okay, let me ask you, you said that the Supreme Court is not a constitutional convention because they do not represent the people. So that seems to suggest a reason why they should not be. But is it true that they've never acted at all, like as if they were a constitutional convention?
Well, I think there's plenty of examples of where they've acted as a constitutional convention. For instance, in Matt v. Ohio, the exclusionary rule of the Fourth Amendment was overridden and expanded to the state level by using the 14th Amendment.
Similarly, in Worcester v. Georgia, the Supreme Court ruled for indigenous autonomy. That was never something talked about either in the Philadelphia Convention or even codified with the new Constitution. And it was Justice Marshall, who really made sure that indigenous autonomy was codified and a new level, even if it was not even talked about in the convention. And that was something that they were acting as the Constitutional Convention in that regard.
I disagree. I don't think that the Supreme Court decisions ever really acted as a constitutional convention. As we saw with Cooper v. Arizona, the decisions that were made, although they did create new provisions on state and federal power, saying that the federal government could not, or the states could ignore federal rule, they still were based on the Constitution, such as in Article 6, where it says that the federal government is supreme to the state governments.
Also, in Obergefell v. Hodges, it ruled that gay marriage was constitutional in the U.S., an issue that Justice Roberts, in his dissenting opinion, noted that wasn't even discussed anywhere in the Constitution, and he believed was not the role of the Supreme Court.
So are the courts acting illegitimately when they make these decisions, even though they don't represent the people?
I don't believe they're acting illegitimately. I think that the courts have exercised their powers and the people have accepted these decisions. I think it would be a different conversation if people didn't abide by the ruling in Griswold v. Connecticut.
Okay, very good. Okay, this was a really strong round. You guys are phenomenal in the amount of information that you encompass. So it is, one of the things that's so impressive is how much you were able to fit in. You had the same amount of time as all of our teams, but you seem to manage to fit in so much more into the 10 minutes than we have heard. I am particularly impressed with the number of examples that you're able to give, both historical examples and examples from later Supreme Court cases. And most of these examples seem to be spot on. I think that there was a little glitch with Charles Pinckney, who I happen to be an expert on Charles Pinckney. And so I can attest that he was not in favor of equal representation and did not argue like a small stater representing South Carolina there. But other than that glitch and, you know, just a couple of hiccups, mostly I really wanted to be able to make a lot of your statements fleshed out more. And I think that that is one of the indications, again, of a good team, is that you're coming in from a lot of different directions. I wasn't always able to see what the big picture was, but I felt as though if we had more time, it would have been a fascinating conversation to try and find out how all of these different things about how the Supreme Court is or isn't a constitutional convention, how it all fit together in the end. But again, it was a very strong round.
And that's exactly how I read it. And I do need to tell you, to the extent that there was a question with the historical accuracy, I guess would be the best way for me to say that, of the example that was given, I strayed from what the question basically asked you about the influences on the Constitution. And when I posed okay, you gave me some of the influences, but I want to find somebody else that you didn't talk about. So let's go with the South, or let's go with, I don't know how fair I think that was of me to do that. So to the extent that I pulled one out that was difficult for you to get, don't get upset. Don't feel bad about that one, because as I thought about it, I'm not sure how fair that was. You all, in my estimation, I was running out. I don't like to flip the page. I was running out of space here. You gave me so much information. I was really, really pleased. You were excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have to agree very wholeheartedly with my colleagues that this was truly exceptional as far as the volume and the speed and, you know, the clarity that you were speaking with. My question was oddly sneaky in that it was both very simple yet very complicated, and you answered it well. In your answer, you were able to simultaneously talk about federalism in the current state and connect it back to some comments about executive power during the convention. And I think, you know, I just, while you were talking about it, you really prompted me to think, I wonder what Hamilton would say today. Is this the executive he wanted? You know, it's just interesting. But you also clarified that the states are the ones that are more powerful. So in essence, the energetic executive of the states is working under these exigent circumstances. So I really appreciated that. I think it shows us, as a judge who's judged a lot, I'm making decisions in response to the presentation. And sometimes it's like, okay, we just gotta like talk about some stuff just so that everyone feels better. Then there's a team that is like, let's go wacky. Let's be as weird as Xander's background. And let's talk about Superman and how he destroys the rule of law, you know? And that's where I have so much fun with this program and students like yourself. So I appreciate you inspiring those neurons of my brain that I never write them. But thank you so much for bringing it. And thank you for being able to communicate your personality and your dynamic nature so boldly through this medium. I think you guys were tripping over each other, but not in a horrible way. It was really, really fun. So thank you.
Yeah, this was definitely a high octane team. So thank you very much.